if I were to be honest, right, I had to tell you that actually Indians and ethnic Indians are very, very much part of the Singapore identity. When Singapore was founded, Singapore was just a small island. It was when the Indians, the Chinese, together with the Malays, who are the original inhabitants of the islands, and the Eurasians came together that we created Singapore. Our
Yeah.
current Chief Justice, Justice Sundaresh Menon, is ethnically Indian. Our
Oh,
current
okay.
President of Singapore, Mr. Taman, who just been voted in with an overwhelming victory, is Indian as well, ethnic
Oh,
Indian.
wow. Hello and welcome to the Daily Lawyer podcast. My name is Jenna Krishnan. I'm your host and also the founder of the Daily Lawyer. And today's podcast is another interview with a lawyer actually from Singapore. We are both part of the International Legal Alliance, ILA, and today's episode is about family planning. When I say family planning, I mean family estate planning. How do you think through your estate? How do you think through planning for your future generations? What is it, the India-Singapore connection in this regard? What do you do if you have assets outside of India and Singapore, or if you're a Singaporean and you want to invest in India? How do you plan for your estate? All of that is what we're going to discuss in today's episode. Before we get into the episode, I want to thank all of you for coming along with me on this ride. I started the Daily Lawyer with a dream that I want to bring more conversations around the law and lawyers, make it simple, demystify the whole profession, because there was really very little information about what really happens within our profession and the vast number of specializations that we have. So we are almost at 50 episodes now, and it's all thanks to your continued support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you have enjoyed the ride so far, if you like this episode, please, please, please consider leaving a review. It will really, really help us and motivate me to keep presenting these conversations for you. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can even screenshot this episode, share it on socials, tag us on socials. It really helps us. So with that, we will now go right into the episode and you can meet our guest for today, Yue-En Chong. Hi, Yue-En. Thank you so much for joining me on the Daily Lawyer podcast and giving me your time on a Saturday morning.
No problem, Jenna. Thanks for having me here. As I said, this time last year, I was actually in Bombay, or Mumbai as the post-97 people call it. And I was just thinking that this is a great way for me to recall my great memories I spent last year over in Bombay. It was a good time with good food, good fun, good friends. And here we are doing a podcast this Saturday morning, talking about things that's close to heart, which is India.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So before I kind of throw all my questions at you because I do have so many. I want to generally tell the audience a little bit about you because you have such a long and impressive resume. I'm going to read a little bit from there, and then I'm going to tell you to tell about your journey within the law. So we have Yue-En Chong, who is a managing director at Bethel Chambers. He specializes in mental capacity law, wills, probate, family law, community law, social care law, and special needs law. So everything in the domain of estate planning, of family, and also counseling. He also holds a distinction, a master's in counseling from the University of Monash. He has done his master's in social care law from Cardiff. My ex-boss was also from Cardiff University.
Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
he was from Malaysia. So you have
Amazing.
so many things to talk about.
We do. And there's
Thank
so
you,
little
thank you.
time.
Yes. Thank you for coming here. And I think the first thing I would want you to tell the audience is about yourself. How did you think of becoming a lawyer? How do you think of choosing this? Because I did not even know that social care law is a thing. And you did your
Yeah.
master's in that. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are.
Well, Jenna, will you believe if I told you that I never wanted to be a lawyer?
Yes, because I'm part of that same group.
Yeah, when I was very young, and you asked me when I was 6 or 7, what would I want to be when I grow up? My answer would be I wanted to be a journalist. I read this local tabloid called The New Paper that I was very impacted by. Not by its scandals, but by the fact that it highlighted a lot of human interest stories about people who face challenges in their lives. And I was really touched about how when journalists cover stories and brought them to light, it results with families being helped. So from a very young age, I wanted to help families, and that is actually one of my goals in life.
That's
Yeah,
lovely.
So what happened was after that, I ended up going through the school system. And when I was 19, I had to start applying for university. And I was pretty sure I was going to study social work or go into counseling or psychology. I did try to apply for a journalism school in the US, but I couldn't get in as well. It happens that a couple of my friends applied for law school, and I was like, okay, why not just try it? And I threw my name in there, and I got in. My friends didn't get in, and
Oh my
guess
God.
what? But it's right now.
This was destined.
Yeah, it's just destiny in that sense, because that was 2005, and here I am, almost 20 years later. Oh my goodness, it's more than 20 years since I made my application to law school in Singapore. I'm still here. I never thought I'd be here for so long. But I guess it's because I still see that it's reason for me being here. So what I found was, instead of writing to the general public about what problems family face, I now serve these families directly in the realm of the law, helping them to solve their family issues and challenges through using law as a tool. As I would like to say, I probably am the most useful person among my relatives and friends, because everybody has a family law issue or knows somebody who might have a family law issue as well.
Yes.
I had a friend who used to joke that she could help you buy an aeroplane, but she probably wouldn't know what to do if you're facing marital issues. Yeah, that's my friend from Hong Kong.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So after that, what happened is, when I went into law school, I knew almost from the start what I wanted to do, which was family law as well as estate law. So what I did after law school was I went to the Singapore Legal Aid Bureau. Now, the Singapore Legal Aid Bureau is government-provided services for people who have low means. And I really wanted to do it because that was where I had my first internship. And I felt it was really meaningful to allow access to justice to everybody. And just because you don't have enough funds doesn't mean that you should be denied justice.
Of course.
Yeah. So from then onwards, I felt that as I did many family law issues and cases, I realized that it was always this knot in the heart of my clients, which I realized could not have been a legal knot, but rather it's an emotional knot. And that brought me over to counseling. So back in 2010, I started doing my master's in counseling. I finished in 2012. I had to do 100 hours of counseling.
Wow.
I did that in between government service and private practice.
Oh
and
my God.
After that, I felt that I was a much better lawyer to be really empathetic towards my clients and really journeying with them in the journey. They are not just a case. They're not just a case to resolve and to collect fees from, but rather it's a privilege for us as family lawyers to be your friends at the point of time to help you through this period, which could be really, really dark.
But this is so wonderful. I want to pause you here because I resonate very deeply with this thought that our job as lawyers is to be solution providers and to understand that, what we do changes somebody's life and their business, whichever way you're. So I'm so relieved, and I admire the fact that you had that foresight so much early, very, very early in your career, and you took the steps to get a counseling degree just so that you can help your clients better. I think it's fabulous.
Yes, and later on after that, my area of interest in mental capacity. Now, mental capacity law is a very not really talked about area of law in India. Because it's all around us. What does it basically mean? I can't make a decision. When I can't make a decision, I do not have mental capacity. What situations, if I have a stroke, a very serious stroke, or I have dementia or Alzheimer's, or if I have mental illness that allows me not to be able to make decisions when my mental illness flare up. These are all situations where we are the most vulnerable, where people can take advantage of us.
Yes.
We really need to be able to appoint people that we trust in order to take care of our affairs where we are at the most vulnerable. So because of that, in 2010, Singapore introduced something called the Mental Capacity Act. Now, I was only just 1 year from after graduation when this was introduced, and I resonated with this act because at that point of time, my grandmother had dementia. Now, my grandmother was really fortunate. She had 4 caregivers. She didn't have to worry about anything. She spent about 20 years with dementia, and even towards the end of her life, she had everything she wanted. She had a daily cake and tea. You know, when you have chai
Wow.
and cake in the afternoon, she had that all the way since she was young. And she loves her cake, she loves her chai, and she had that every afternoon all the way until she passed away. That is the quality of life I would want. But that's because she did forward planning. She had plans put into place. And just though that this is one topic that I've been talking a lot about with Indian advocates in the last 1 month, is India does not have any system that allows the pre-planning of somebody who you choose as your personal or legal representative should you not be able to make a decision. And the question is why? There's a huge elderly population, aging population in India right now. Many of them have assets. There's also probably a rise of financial abuse. And if financial abuse rise, then when we are in an elderly age and we have no one to look after these assets, when you're a professional that we trust like lawyers, then in that case there, are we going to be vulnerable? Are we going to find ourselves out in the streets? And I think that would be really the saddest thing to happen.
Of course, yeah.
Especially with increasing number of Indian nationals living away from home and living overseas as well. The parents that are left behind in India, in the cities, would they be back in time to have an eye over their assets and their affairs?
No, they
So I
don't.
think this-
We know so
they
many
don't, right?
stories. Yeah, we know so many stories of that. Yeah.
I wish I had the ability to go straight to the Indian Congress Parliament to just say that we need this law in India. We need this law not 40 years later, but right now. Because there is a lot of people. But that is also another role which I take, is that I am also part of another organization called STEP, Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, which was founded in England. It's now across 100 different jurisdictions and over 22,000 members. Now in STEP, we focus on trust. Another area that we focus on is mental capacity. So with my team of global lawyers from 11 different jurisdictions, I'm currently the global chair in this area. And what we've been doing over the last 2 years, we've been going around the world, going to different jurisdictions, different countries, and looking at their mental capacity law to see whether we can help local advocates bring about forward planning, new laws that allows this. My dream is that India will have this law soon, sooner than later. I would like to say,
let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm like, hey, come on. China already has it. November 2020. I just discovered last year that they introduced it. Yeah, I was in Hong Kong and I told the Hong Kong lawyers, what are you doing? China has abilities to plan for both your health, your personal welfare, and your assets. In Hong Kong, you can only plan for your assets. Plan ahead for it. Yeah. So because of that, I'm like, if China's ahead of everybody right now, there's no excuse for the rest of the world not to do it too. Of course, there is many different ways and considerations, but let's get this conversation going. So if anyone out there is interested in this area and think that you would want yourself, your personal autonomy, your independence to be safeguarded before you lose mental capacity, should you lose it one day, then this is a conversation we should take. They said, we might all be a small ant, but as one of my favorite persons say, always like to say, an African proverb is, many ants can move an elephant.
Yes, that's true. But coming now, taking this thread forward, because I always used to wonder earlier, what is the, especially when we used to study law, we never used to study testamentary law at all in college. And then we had to practice it. I had to practice testamentary law in a very limited capacity. And I would wonder, why are we not told the importance of testamentary law, that it gives you the choice to decide how your assets have to go and not so why are more people not making wills? And this is the conversation I wanted to have with you specifically, as to what is the importance that you see of, you just spoke so nicely on mental capacity. That is a huge part, and that's a missing piece which we will all do our best to work towards, and I'm happy to be part of any initiative of that on that front. But why is this area of law so important, and why is it that people, whether it's young students or young lawyers or even seasoned lawyers or just regular people who are listening, why should they pay attention to this?
Well, the first thing is, this is what somebody once said: no one truly appreciates family and estate planning law until you have to actually use it. Yeah, because I think it's fundamentally part of us. It's all around us. And because of that, we don't because it's just so close to us, we might just not see it, because when we look with our eyes, we look at what's ahead of us, in front of us, but we don't actually look at ourselves within and introspect. And because of that, we might miss the importance of family law and testamentary law. It might appear to be very easy and very uncomplicated, which I would have to tell you right now is not the case. So one thing in law school, I have to say, at least in the Singapore bar examinations, we are taught testamentary law. So at least it's introduced. Perhaps for law schools, for law students, that people may think there's not enough case law for testamentary law, which again, I'll say that's not the case, because there is many contested wills, contested administrations of estates, principles, and in India, I would imagine there's Hindu Unified Family Act. There is also other acts for every single religious groups and religious laws concerning this. So because of that, I think that it has to be a topic that at least should be introduced in every single law school, because this is a topic that even if you don't practice in it, it's something you need to know for yourself. So I think in this particular case here, Singapore actually created a third law school that specializes into family and criminal law, and I can say that this module is a mandatory module in that law school on testamentary law. Yeah. So I think going on from there, I did touch about why is it that it's actually complicated. And I think from this, let me just tell you a story. So once upon a time, somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm this mother. I have 3 kids. My husband has passed away. He passed away without a will. Now, because he passed away without a will, he was the sole owner of this apartment I'm living in. And I'm living in there. I've been living there for 30 years. I know all my neighbors. But right now, the house belongs to me and my 3 sons. And out of my 3 sons, one of my sons, who I don't have a good relationship with, wants to sell this house. So when you want to sell this house, you say, where am I going to stay? He has offered for me to buy over his share, but I don't have any money. I have to move from this place which I have been living in for the last 30 years because my husband didn't leave a will. I think this is the kind of tragic stories that is there. But how about this other tragic story about inheritance without a will?
I'm trying not to ask you what happened next, but
what happened next?
Yeah. Did she have to move? There's no other choice.
Well, what happened after that, right, in this particular situation was, thankfully, the family got together and they did a deed of family arrangement. Yes, they had mediation. The mother and the son who she exchanged with at least managed to have a conversation through mediation. And they found a solution that allowed them for the mother to continue to live on there until she passed away. It had a happy ending in this case. But I know of another case where there wasn't a happy ending. This is a very tragic case where the husband unfortunately committed suicide. Yeah, leaving behind his elderly parents and his wife. Now, the elderly parents then came to, this is another lawyer that I knew of, to the lawyer and said, what can we do? This house belonged to my son. And now, the daughter-in-law and the daughter says that it belongs to her and the kid. And this was the woman who drove my son to suicide. And according to Singapore law, unfortunately, the parents get nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing, because he left behind a spouse and a child. Now, if you were in Malaysia or you were in China, the parents would get something, not entirely all, but something. But now, they have been living in this house with a daughter-in-law and a grandkid. Their son committed suicide, and now they are being driven from the home by the daughter-in-law, who says it completely belongs to her. So I think in this case are 2 examples I bring up to why it's important to forward plan with a will, your intentions. Many of us don't actually think, and one of the biggest mistakes on why we are not doing planning is perhaps we always think that there's always tomorrow.
Yes.
There's always tomorrow. I'm still young. Nothing's going to happen to me. Wills are only for those in their 80s and 90s. Well, I would say that with life and with destiny, you never know when your time is up. And with that, we don't want our loved ones, people. Now, if I was just wondering if I could have told that man who committed suicide, I could have told him that this would be the consequence. Would he have then done a will? I mean, I can't control whether he would have taken his life in the end, but at the end of the day, he would have at least made provisions for his.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think this is why it's so important for us to have these conversations like this, and maybe like spray it all over the internet if we can, because at least if we can reach one person somewhere in the corner of the world who listens to us and says, okay, no matter, I don't know what is happening in your personal life, but if you can just figure out that who you leave behind is taken care of, that'll be, we've done a little bit of our jobs.
Yes, and I think this is a conversation that we have. I mean, the other reason, which is a very real reason, I mean, I completely respect this reason, is many of us, I would even dare say myself, we are afraid of death.
Yeah.
Now, death is a very scary thing. It means losing ourselves. We have no idea what happens after death. And talking about will means that we are being confronted with a mortality that we wouldn't be around.
Yes.
And to many of us, we just can't bear with that idea. We just have too much to live for. We just can't deal with it. Maybe unless we are, stage 4 terminal cancer, then maybe we have to face up with the reality of death. But at this moment in time, I have to tell you, I did my will. I did my will when I had a child.
Good job. Yeah, me too. I did my will when I bought my own house. And then I was wondering, oh my God, if me and my husband and what will happen to my 2 kids? And that's the only, So you're right. We only do it when we are faced with like an external situation, when we are faced with our mortality.
Correct. Good job, Jenna. At least both you and I have done our wills. Well, I have to say that doing my will was actually not as scary as I thought. Because in fact, it was a very meaningful exercise to me, because I started to introspect and ask myself, what do I really want? Do I really want to give everything to my spouse? Do I want to provide for other people as well? Do I want to give everything to my son and not to my spouse? Because many of my clients come to me and say, why my spouse remarry and marry somebody else? That's what I call how wealth can pass within families. Imagine this, my wealth passes to my wife. My wife doesn't do a will, and it passes to her new husband. Yes, and this has actually happened in a real case of mine.
God.
Yeah, and it was because of wills, and not just wills, but lack of wills, sorry. In this case, it passed along. So it ends up with the wife family not actually having anything, extended family. Yeah, there were people and relatives you could give to. Yeah, but not in Singapore, but it didn't happen. So, I mean, in cases like this, I think having this conversation could actually be more meaningful than you can imagine. But when you have a conversation about your death, please also have a conversation about your incapacity, which I call the mental death, which we were just talking about earlier in the podcast.
Yes, that's a point that I've certainly missed in my will, I can tell you that.
But the problem, Jenna, is that even if you're missing your will, the problem is I don't know if you have any documents that you can even execute in India for this.
I know. Yeah, you're right. What can we do?
You could probably do a living will in India.
Yeah,
because
we could.
The Supreme Court in India has really recognized living wills. Wait, I shouldn't be. I'm not. By the way, I'm not advising on Indian law. I'm just telling you what I've heard and what I've read. Okay, I just want to be clear. I'm not an Indian lawyer. I'm not qualified to give Indian advice.
Okay, we have noted the disclaimer. But in terms of living wills, also, I mean, there are so many conditions for living wills. So it may not be applicable for all of us. So that's conversation we really need to think about. What do we do?
Plus, living wills, if I'm not wrong, goes into what is the contents of living wills. I haven't quite investigated into it, but if the living wills really pertains to whether you wish to continue living or whether it will involve appointment of representatives to manage your assets, I don't know. I would need Indian lawyers to advise me on this. But
yeah, I want to have a conversation on that, but I think we'll take it.
We'll go on this another time. Yes, with someone from. Who's familiar with this in India? Maybe someone else in our ILA.
Yeah, we actually did a full round table on living wills some time ago, maybe year and a half ago, I think, if I'm not wrong. But I don't know whether we've put it up for public viewing. I think I have to check.
Okay, definitely
Yeah.
will check it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. The other mistake is that, at least in terms of how you hold property, even if you hold property in your own name or you hold it in joint name with another person, it really depends on the complexities of the law and regulations pertaining to property. You might think that your property will go to the person who you co-own it with, but with concepts of trust, arguments on whether this person who may have not contributed anything should actually inherit the property, these are all questions that goes into court. So again, intention is something that is being looked upon by courts all around the world right now. What is the intention of the testator, the person who gives the gift? And I think that is something that has to be very, very importantly preserved as well as recorded. And that's where lawyers come in, because
Yes.
when you're not around, we are the one going to court for you to tell the judge as witnesses to what your intention is.
Yes.
Yeah. We will be on the stand, cross-examined and grilled because of
Yes.
that. But we are there to protect you and protect your wishes even after you are gone.
Yes, that's well said. And I think this part of the podcast is probably going to extract put it on socials, because this is important for us to underscore that we are actually there to protect you, not just while you're alive, but also after you're gone, and your assets, and also to advise you as to what is the most sensible way for you to think through allocation of your resources, because we've seen so many cases and so many examples of things going wrong that we've also learned our lessons from those, just like the ones that you mentioned today. Now, I wanted to just pick up the threads from what you mentioned earlier about, thinking through mental capacity, which is something that we are still unclear about when it comes to Indian jurisdiction, and maybe we can have a conversation on that, a separate podcast on that, as to how we can provide for that within the existing framework of our regulations. But just for someone like you and me, who have, say, young children and a spouse and maybe parents and all of us, one of the things that I thought of when I was doing my will is, in case tomorrow my husband and I both die, I wanted someone who will be appointed as legal guardians for my children and who will, take. So that is a conversation that I had. Similarly, what are some of the questions, or what are some of the things that you would say people must think about at our age and then at various age groups, and then provide that in their will?
I think it's a very, very good question you asked, Jenna. Two questions. First of all, what happens if you have children, and what happens if both you and your spouse tragically pass away in an accident or plane crash or car accident? Now, let me just tell you, this is very, very uncommon. Well, as it's very dramatized, it's actually a very uncommon life. But I think if we brought it to what is practical, during COVID. Now, during COVID, no one knew exactly what's going to happen. I had many people who are working in Singapore, and they may be staying here with their families, but most of the extended families were back in their home countries. They were very concerned that if they had COVID, they would actually be quarantined in hospital. Who is going to look after their children? They might have a domestic helper, engaged help to look after, but the engaged help is not going to give instructions or has parental authority over the children. Instead, for themselves, if they were incapacitated because of COVID, or it'd be okay. If they could still give remote instructions on how to care for children is one thing, but if they were incapacitated, or even worse, if COVID had taken their lives, what's going to happen to the children? There's this idea of temporary guardianship. Now, temporary guardianship doesn't exist in Singapore. Yeah, only one country I know of has it, and this is Nevada in USA. When I was trying to do research on it, they actually have laws allowing that. But this is a separate topic for another time. But I think in the will, what you can do is that if both of you do pass away, you can name guardians. Now, two scenarios here. First scenario is that if you're concerned that both yourself and your spouse both pass away, you don't want both bad grandparents going to court fighting to see who is going to look after the grandkids. Yeah. As parents, you might have preference to who you think might be better to bring up your kids in accordance to your values. Or you may just not want your parents to bring up your kids. Yeah, for whatever reasons. Or even if it's not the parents, it may be other family members. But often it seems that family members or blood ties have a natural affinity to look after the kids, but that may not always be the case. What if you're very close friends? But what if you're part of a community that is that may not be your family, but a community of friends? In your will, you can name something called a testamentary guardian, at least that is in Singapore, that allows you to name. Normally, I would advise husbands and wives to actually name the same person or persons as the testamentary guardians. Of course, the testamentary guardians can step into a role as guardians if anything happens to the parents, and they can continue to care for the children and make guardianship decisions. In another scenario, this is where I advise the making of a will. It's a more sad scenario, which is called divorce. So when divorce happens, sometimes the children are then ordered to stay with the mom. And then the mom finds a few years down the road that they have a terminal illness. Now, there's a good reason to why maybe they have divorced the spouse. The spouse might have been violent towards herself and the children. And under Singapore law, the guardianship of the other parent still remains even in divorce. Which means, yes, Jenna, is exactly what you're thinking. The children custody will revert back to the abusive father. This is actually what will happen under the law here. What it can be done is the mother can, in her will, appoint guardians who will then step into her place as guardian. They at least have the locus standi, the right to go to court, to then ask the court to make orders if the children should then resume residence with the father. Is the father fit or unfit to care for the children? That is something really important that many people don't think about. But at least that is something that I do advise my clients over here in Singapore.
That's something even I didn't think about till you just said this. What about assets? Because we were just talking some time ago about the India story, and that's something I want to come to. But just to continue this line, what about assets? Like, I have a cousin who lives in Singapore. Her parents live here. They have become Singaporean citizens, but they have assets in India as well and in Singapore. I know someone who's bought a house here in India, living in Singapore for her parents to live till they are alive, and then I don't know what happens to the house if once she passes away or anything between the parents, anything happens. So how do you provide for that, and how do you help in that?
Right. Okay. How am I helping right now in this? When people, I think the very first concept is the concept of domicile. It's a very common law, British law concept. And the question here is that anybody has a domicile in one place. So what does domicile mean? It means that the place of your permanent home, the place which you intend to reside. And if you take citizenship in Singapore, it could be argued that, well, your domicile of origin was India, it's now shifted to Singapore. Which means that if you pass away without a will, then the assets will be divided in accordance with law of domicile. So you have a property in Singapore, your bank accounts in Singapore, it will divided in accordance with Singapore succession law. However, I think this is a common international law principle that if you pass away without a will and you have assets in a different country, those will be divided in accordance with the law of that country. So in that sense, if you were Singaporeans in Singapore, but you still have assets in landed property or immovable properties in India, without a will, it will be divided in accordance with Indian law, or whichever Indian law you will fall under. Meaning that there are a few different Indian laws in relation to succession.
Yes.
So now we're talking about wills. Now, wills is even more tricky because in Singapore, you execute a will in Singapore in accordance to a few criteria. This will is valid in Singapore. The fun question we always ask is, so the heirs to the will or the beneficiary of the wills brings this will to India and then says, hey, guess what? This will, which is a worldwide will that covers my parents' assets in the whole wide world, including those in India. Now, Indian court, please recognize it and please let me have control over these assets. That is a question that I do ask estate lawyers in every single country, whether the will be upheld and respected, because this goes into testamentary law in the other country. Increasingly, with people having assets in different countries, it's important to do a will. For example, a person could do more than one will. You could do a will in Singapore over Singapore assets only. You could do a will in India over Indian assets only. So in that sense here, this would actually work. But this is what people have been doing, and in some cases, it has worked so far. At least for some cases that I've done in Singapore. So I think this is all the different parts of planning that they don't teach you in law school. And at the same time, it's actually all governed by law. So many of us might think, wills are quite simple. We just take a piece of paper out. We just write that this is my last will and testament. We just write in the content. We get 2 people to witness me signing it, and that's it. But behind the will, there's a lot of law.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like sometimes, there's a lot of helpful people out there who help people to write wills for a fee.
Yeah.
And they are not legally trained, so they may not be that familiar with the law.
Yeah.
They may not be able to advise you on the law, but they'll be able to help you to gather your assets together, help you think through processes. And that's why I always say for wills, it's very important that you have someone who's legally trained to look at your planning through the lens of a legal expert.
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to the case in the Indian nationals who are now Singapore citizens who have assets in Singapore, I would do a will for them. I'll do a will, I'll do a lasting power attorney, and thereafter I would actually have this will checked back with Indian lawyers in order to see whether these wills would be upheld in India. And if this will would not be upheld, then perhaps we will do
a will just for the Indian assets.
Yes, for the Indian assets as well, to ensure that their wishes are preserved.
What if we do like, I'm just asking you as a solution that, let's say in my cousin's case, who's bought a house for her parents here in India, and we do maybe a gift or whatever, that all the house is transferred to the ones who are living here with Indian citizenship, so that all the Indian assets are in their name, and then everything which is in Singapore is in her name. Is this something that you help doing? Yes. Because it's all case to case, right? It depends on the internal relationship of people.
It really depends on 2 things. First is actually depends on the country's law. I mean, recently someone came to me and asked that, how about I transfer my gift to you? I said, but your son is no longer is not a Chinese citizen anymore. He's a Singapore citizen. And laws in China may not allow foreigners to hold certain assets. Yeah, that will be a question that an Indian lawyer has to clarify. I mean, if it's an Indian citizen in Singapore who has not given up the Indian citizenship, then definitely it could be that the parents then pass it as a gift to the other person who is qualified under Indian law to hold these assets. Because we don't want the gift or the deed of gift to be disqualified for illegality.
So this is we are again speaking to the point of why it's important to go to a professional, a legal professional, for doing your estate planning. And first of all, why it's important to plan your estate, which is something you spoke about earlier and in a lot of detail. And then how do you plan your estate, which is also what we spoke about earlier about, what are the questions to think about, and also thinking through mental incapacity. And finally, why it is important to go to a professional who has done this. Don't go to any lawyer who's probably doing real estate work, and then that lawyer, so then you make them do your will as well. It's not taking away from the credibility of that lawyer, but it always makes sense to go to a specialist who does this for a living. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
Yes, of course. So unfortunately, many people don't actually end up doing wills, and they do pass away. So I would want to talk a little bit about the letters of administration, this process. So letters of administration, I think it goes by a different term in India, but basically it means that you pass away.
We have letters of administration.
Oh, you do? All right. Okay, so same term. Okay. When you have letters of administration, people pass away without a will. Now in Singapore, the whole process is one that would involve an Indian lawyer coming in to give an opinion to how assets are distributed in accordance with Indian law. The whole process in Singapore takes a couple of months, but one thing that I do offer my clients is that if they don't want to fly over to Singapore, we could be appointed as administrators of their estate. And then that is where we go about closing the bank accounts, selling the property, and then after that, having the monies then remitted back to whoever are the beneficiaries in overseas. Of course, the reason why people will appoint us is sometimes the assets and the administration of assets doesn't take place immediately. It's not like simple as going down to the bank account and closing it. If you're going to sell property or there's an administration of the estates, you may actually want to get professionals to do it for you. So especially during COVID, that was where I was helping many families to actually administer the estates in Singapore and then after have it remitted back to wherever they are from.
Yeah. And now there's this one part before we jump into the last segment. I know that we've been going over time because we've just been chatting, and I love chatting like this, especially when the conversation just flows. But before we started recording, we were speaking about your vision on why you are so positive about India and the young population, and then the aging population and all of that. So I want you to say, because you're more eloquent on that than I am. So please go ahead.
All right. So if I were to be honest, right, I had to tell you that actually Indians and ethnic Indians are very, very much part of the Singapore identity. I mean, you might call it paratha, you might call it prata, you might call it roti, you might call it naan. It depends, but we love our bread. We love our bread in the morning. Singapore cuisine and cuisine
Yes.
has so much Indian elements to it. It's just everywhere. But it's not because it's something that's important. No. I consider that ethnic Indians are one of the 4 founding races in Singapore, 4 founding ethnicities, together with the Chinese, the Malays, the Eurasians, who are basically trades-born people who have European ancestry, whether Portuguese, Dutch, or English, as well as ethnic Indians. When Singapore was founded, Singapore was just a small island. It was when the Indians, the Chinese, together with the Malays, who are the original inhabitants of the islands, and the Eurasians came together that we created Singapore. In fact, here are some fun facts about Singapore. Our
Yeah.
current Chief Justice, Justice Sundaresh Menon, is ethnically Indian. Our
Oh,
current
okay.
President of Singapore, Mr. Taman, who just been voted in with an overwhelming victory, is Indian as well, ethnic
Oh,
Indian.
wow.
Yeah, and I think this was something that I was extremely proud about because Mr. Taman, who is a politician and was the senior minister in Singapore as well, if I got my politics correct, was up against 2 other men who are running for the role of president. Now, Singapore, the executive power is with the prime minister, but the president holds a very huge significance in Singapore as well. So the 2 other men were ethnic Chinese. I think someone did try to play the race card. He was immediately shut down by the media on that point because the number of Indians in Singapore is probably only about 8%. But
Oh,
then, Mr. Taman won with 80% of the entire country vote.
wow.
Yes, which actually showed overwhelming endorsement by everyone in Singapore, regardless of race, language, or
Yes.
religion, which is
That's
part of our
lovely.
national pledge.
Yeah.
And I think in that, it was a very proud moment, really, because I mean, we have been saying for years is that in Singapore we look past the color of skin, we look past religion, we look past background, we really look at meritocracy, which is how good you are and how good you contribute. Basically, it's just how smart you are as well. So I suppose in this case here, Mr. Taman was at some point in time running also for, I think, the chairmanship of the World Economic Fund, WEF, or World Bank, one of them. Yeah, but definitely it really shows that there is something about the connection with Singapore and India is very strong and continues to be strong. But here's the thought about the future. Now, I would like to think that I have about 40 years more to go in terms of my career. I look at myself working into my 80s. No, that's terrible. Okay, 30 years more. So, the thing about it is that we look in terms of the economic landscape. Tell me, which country has the largest population in the world? No, it's not China anymore, it's India. But which country also has one of the youngest population in the world? And that's India as well.
Yes.
Even more than China itself. And the reason that is, I say that India is the country of the future. And that is something that I really believe very strongly because with a young population and with systems and government in place in order to get everything together, as well as with the hunger and the eagerness of a lot of young Indians. I just put up an advert for paralegal and had so many applications from Indians who are currently in India to work with my law firm. But unfortunately, I can't because of quota status.
Yes.
But I can just see that really that this is something that any lawyer around the world would be remiss if they actually do not consider India as part of their practice as well. Because there's so much things going for India right now. So I mean, it's in which that not just on currently the elderly population, which is the area that I work with, but also for the future too. So I think in this area here, I think where we should look at, especially to all young Indian law students, is think about this. Think global.
Yeah.
Think global. Don't just think about what is going to happen just in India alone, but think global. Think of what does India have to give to the world.
Yeah.
And whatever India has to give to the world, that will also follow along lines, regulation, procedures, contracts, and that is where the Indian lawyer goes worldwide.
That's a nice answer. It's a lovely answer. And this is a nice segue to our last segment. So our last segment is more like a quick 5, 4, I call it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I ask you 5 of something, 4 of something, 3 of something like that. But the answers have to be really short.
Okay.
One word to one line maybe. So 5 productivity tips that you would like to give, or what is something that
All
you
right.
use in your everyday?
This is called my start the day. 5 things. Start the day with 1. Gratefulness. 2. Kindness. 3. Empathy. 4. Other focused. And 5. Being true to your own principles.
Wow. And you do this every day? That's a
I try
that's
I try to
lovely.
do so.
That's
Yes.
lovely. That's something I'm going to take from this conversation. I'm going to try it, and I'm going to message you and tell you how it's gone after a week.
All
4
right.
books.
Looking for you. 4 books. Well,
Yeah.
being a business owner, 2 books on business. First, Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. A good book to actually look in terms of how to scale up your business to make it a multi-million-dollar business.
Wow. Okay.
Another one called Profit First by Mike Kurlowicz, which is Michalowicz, which is a way for you to actually do savings in terms for the revenue for your law firm. So, or your business. So these are 2 business books. But I talk about 2 other books that I really do like. One is This Child Is Mine, a novel by Henry Danker that really brought me on this whole idea of child law. And last one is Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis.
Wow. I love
A
it.
series that actually brings lots of hope.
Yeah. Lovely. No one has actually recommended that so far. None of the 4 books that you have said has ever been recommended so far on the podcast. Okay, 3 tips that you'd like to give either current law students or young lawyers.
Yes. First, be curious and never stop questioning why. Law is not just what is written. It also consists of policy and reform. If law is written in a way that's vague or doesn't cover areas and lacunas, that's where law reform comes in. Remember, law reform is important. Mental capacity law in India.
Yes.
Second point, be hardworking. No cutting of corners. And finally, be humble and willing to learn, but do not be afraid to voice out your views. As bosses, we want to hear your views.
Lovely. Very nice. 2 life lessons that you want to share with everyone that you've learned in your life so far.
Okay, the first life lesson is, even in the darkest night, dawn will still come. I'm not promising you it's just around the corner, but it will still come. Because that's the natural order of things. Dawn will always come. Light will always come after darkness. Number 2, sometimes when you look back and you see things in hindsight, you might realize that it was not so bad after all. Sometimes you need to climb that mountain of difficulty to reach the top, and you can really appreciate the journey we come from. So even if you didn't get into your choice law school, you didn't get into a choice job, look forward at what's ahead of you. Make that climb, because it will still be worth it.
Lovely. Very nice. And what is the best advice that you have ever received?
Well, I have so many best advice over the life, but I'll say something that my grandmother told me. My late grandmother, who had dementia until she was 105 years old, but this was what she said. It is not what you say, but it's how you say it.
Yeah.
How do you cloak your language in grace, in kindness, in empathy? Can even make the most difficult message one that is very palatable.
That's lovely. Thank you, Yue-En. It was such a wonderful conversation. I think I still have a couple of podcasts more with you on like very focused topics, and I'm looking forward to doing that at some point. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? I know, all of your socials and everything we'll put in the show notes, but anything else you'd like to share with us or the audience?
Well, I think one thing I'd like to share is, once again, thank you for having me here. You might be your first time hearing a Singaporean speak. We are just a tiny little small country in Southeast Asia. But I think if you can learn more about Singapore, get to know us, I think we have a lot to offer the world. Yes. Singapore is a great place to do business.
Yes, it really is. I can tell you that from experience that it's true. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna. Thanks for having me here today.